Hello and welcome to the World News on VOP TV. I'm Esther Mwachuku. We begin the world news in Egypt, where at least 14 people have been killed and 25 persons injured after a bus collided with a heavy transport truck on a desert highway. The accident occurred around 250 miles southwest of Cairo, in New Valley province that shares a long border with neighboring Libya. 17 ambulances were dispatched to the scene to ferry the injured to hospitals. An official said the bus slammed into the truck, which was nearly parking on the road. It was reported that the bus was carrying 45 people heading to the capital, Cairo. Deadly traffic accidents claim thousands of lives every year in Egypt, which has a poor transportation safety record. Now, the collisions are mostly caused by speeding, bad roads, or poor enforcement of traffic laws. Let's now move to neighboring Sudan to bring you up to speed with the updates of the conflict that has entered its 19th consecutive day. Heavy fighting was reported in and around the capital Khartoum early Thursday, despite a week-long ceasefire agreed by both sides in the conflict. Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Defense Forces each appear to be trying to push the other out of central Khartoum and control areas around the presidential palace and army headquarters. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres appealed on Wednesday for an end to the fighting in Sudan and international support for the Sudanese people, who he said are facing a humanitarian catastrophe. Secretary-General of the United Nations Antonio Guterres has said aid must be allowed into Sudan, along with the need to secure access to be able to distribute aid to people who need it most. Sudan's health ministry says more than 500 people have been killed and nearly 5,000 wounded since the fighting began in April 15 during a power struggle between the leaders of the Sudanese government forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The United Nations Migration Agency said this week that at least 334,000 people have been internally displaced by the fighting, in addition to the 100,000 who have fled the country. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned the fighting could cause more than 800,000 people to flee the northeastern African country. Many are going to the 7 countries that border Sudan, which include Chad, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, Egypt, and Ethiopia. On Tuesday, South Sudan's foreign ministry announced that Sudanese Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, had agreed to the new ceasefire. The UN chief expressed concerns that previous ceasefires have consistently been violated. He also urged the international community to press the 2 generals to respect and implement the latest one. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir stressed the importance of a longer truce and the naming of envoys to peace talks, to which both sides agreed. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said his government would support talks in Sudan between the rival factions, adding he is being careful about not interfering in their domestic matters. Most aid operations have been suspended or severely scaled back due to the insecurity. Several aid workers have been killed in the fighting. The Norwegian Refugee Council said on Wednesday that one of their Sudanese volunteers was killed on Sunday in the volatile city of Janina in West Darfur. The World Food Programme also disclosed recently that nearly 17,000 tons of food had been stolen from its warehouses across Sudan, and it was working to determine what supplies remain. Before the fighting, WFP, that's the World Food Programme, had more than 80,000 tons of stock in the country. The agency still plans to provide food assistance for 384,000 people in the coming days. The UN Refugee Agency's in Darfur coordinator said looting has long been a problem in Darfur, and many of their facilities have been robbed since April 15. He said local authorities in Darfur have been working with humanitarians to try to make sure the various national ceasefires are respected at the local level so aid can be distributed. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies said on Thursday that they had launched an emergency appeal to support the Sudanese Red Crescent Society to deliver assistance to 200,000 people. Now, in order for us to look at what is actually going on in neighboring Sudan, we have joining us virtually Deyemi Saka, who is a global affairs analyst and, of course, a political commentator. Deyemi Saka, welcome to the World News right here on VOP TV.
Good afternoon, Esther.
Now, you've heard me read about what is currently going on in Sudan, the devastating crisis there. Right now, there's pillaging going on, goods and food is being stolen. Actually, there's no food. There is going to be a health crisis. A lot of dead bodies are there. Let's look at how diplomatic relations, that is the relationship that Sudan has with its neighboring countries, how it's going to impact them after, if at all, we are going to experience a ceasefire. What are the implications, the international implications of this war between two major parties who do not have the regard for lives and properties of their residents?
Immediate neighbor of Sudan is South Sudan. And I don't think they're probably going to enjoy anything from South Sudan because if the South Sudan, while in Sudan gave Africa probably the world all of its longest civil war. That's the longest. It comes second to the one in Sri Lanka. So you ask yourself, what do you expect from it? Bad blood from South Sudan. And Sudan is divided like along this tribe and what's it called? Southern Sudan is largely Christian. Main Sudan is largely Muslim. International community, you look at the former military head of state, Omar al-Bashir, was declared a war crime fugitive by the International Criminal Court of Justice. That is still there. So you don't expect the European community or probably the United Nations to embrace him. At the Hague is a wanted man. And it's not as if al-Bashir left office and what you have is a flourishing democracy, which is to the fancy of either the European Union, America, or the BRICS nations, you want to call it, or even United Nations. So the government in place in South Sudan doesn't have the general acceptability of the global community on the diplomatic world. So it's like, and there's a proverb in Yoruba land that somebody that you want to burn keep dousing himself with fuel. So that's what's happening right now in South Sudan. I don't see. It's just something born out of ego crisis, two men ego tripping.
Well, let's look at the fallout of these crises, the crisis within Sudan, especially concerning the ego of these two individuals, that is the Rapid Response Forces and, of course, the army itself. If you look at how the fighting started, it was not supposed to have become what it is, although there was tension building. The international communities have actually asked for there to be a ceasefire, for there to be dialogue. You also recall that these two factions, or these two individuals, worked together to, throw out the former president who was there for a long time. And he has actually been in prison, although now we've heard that he had been relocated because most of the inmates were released. There was no food, there's no water, and most of the security officials have to fight. So there's no one to cater or look after anybody. But if we look at the devastating situation currently in Sudan, we do know it's a country that has always experienced wars. But at some point, there was a relaxed moment in that region. And we began to see some investments and, what I call it upgrading, whereby you had a lot of international civilians or residents come to settle there. What does that take now for this particular country? Do you think they'll be able to build up again, if at all they eventually try to come to an agreement to seize their arms and stop killing each other?
With the right leadership, Sudan will always bounce back because Sudan is rich when it comes to enormous mineral resources. There's gold, there's diamond, massive land, valuable land for agriculture, just like South Sudan. But for me, this is a call out, and these are probably a lesson to African leaders that you should stop arming non-state actors. And the ego conflict is expected because the guy in charge of the armed forces is a career military person. He grew in the rank, and is a general in the army. The other person was just a tribal warlord, a felon that was armed by al-Bashir, the former military head of state, to counter the rebellion, in the Darfur region. And after that, it gave him so much money and what have you, the gold reserve there. And the guy became so rich, so powerful, and it drafted him into activities of the state. So over time, you cannot expect a career military person to bow down to somebody that just mastered the art of guerrilla warfare. I can understand the ego of the head of state, the trained general, the head of the armed forces. If I'm in his shoes, I'll do the same thing. I cannot subject a well-trained army to to the leadership of it to a ragtag or the leader of a ragtag army. Or even I cannot subject the leadership of a country to a leader of a ragtag army that just got the patronage of the former head of state that gotten that prominence and power. So whether we like it or not, well, if the two generals have to leave for the good of Sudan, the head of the rapid response force has to be demobilized. Has to be, demobilized. That's the word, and has to be put in its place for the future of Sudan as a country. Because you don't cast or you don't paint illegality with legality. You don't try and give illegality a clout of legality. And that's what's happening in Sudan. That's why they're paying the price for it.
Now
Heavily.
let's look at the international communities, the United Nations, Europe, as well as Russia. Apparently, right now, most of the international communities have been able to evacuate most of their members, residents who reside there, who have some diplomatic relations in Sudan. Does this actually say that a lot of persons, a lot of these communities or international, these nations are pulling out and leaving Sudan to their fate? Because that's how it seems. When these strong powers have eventually evacuated their people who is of a primary concern to them, then it means that, okay, we are leaving you to do whatever it is you want to do. If you want to kill yourself to the end, you do. If you want to destroy your nation, it's at your own peril. But we've evacuated our people. Could this be that this is what it means? Because right now, Russia has actually sent, its own, will I say, helicopter or a plane there actually to evacuate about 200 of his officials. That's 200. The remaining one of them, the remaining Russian officials currently in Sudan. So does this say now these international communities who could have actually had a strong influence in stopping the war currently going on in Sudan are leaving them to their fate since they've refused to listen to the ceasefire?
Well, I probably will not say that, but I hope what I'm saying is not going to cause a diplomatic row between Nigeria and either Russia or China. I see the Wagner group of Russia stepping into Sudan just like they did in Mali, and it's for reasons just for profitability. There's huge mineral resources there. China is prosecuting the war, whether we like it or not. Russia is prosecuting the war, whether we like it or not. There's need for it to boost its resources. Yeah, the Russian ruble for the very first time in a long while, gained strength against the dollar. I guess because of the new formed policy among the BRICS nations. The BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And trust me, I don't see Russia pulling out. They might pull out their diplomatic staff, families, and what that.
Basically.
But at Wagner Group, because it's like who controls the government or who install the government controls the resources. And I'm bold to say this is not about Western imperialism or Africanism or Marxist theory, what have you. Until we have leaders that will make African resources work for Africa, we'll be having crises like this. What they want is have greedy leaders, egocentric leaders that will not use the resources of Africa for Africans. That's the price we're paying for it. So if you think they are going to leave South Sudan to this, they will not. Or Sudan to this, they will not. South Sudan is dealing with its own crisis. But thank God those ones have been able to manage. But Sudan as a country, probably, I'm not trying to be a prophet of doom, but this might blow into a full-scale war. And they might just have this crisis for another 2-3 years, like we had in Syria alone.
All right. Now, the World Health Organization regional director in the person of Ahmed Al-Madari has said that the health facilities have come under heavier attack in Khartoum, and some are being used as military bases. So about 26 reported attacks have occurred on the healthcare facilities. Does it mean that if the healthcare facilities are completely dilapidated and destroyed, that it means that there are some severe injuries that may not be helped, especially for those civilians, innocent civilians, including a mother, that is the mothers and the children, especially some pregnant women at the moment who are currently stuck in Sudan?
It's also sad that I'm not trying to be a mischievous, I'm not trying to start a gender war, but the people that suffer mostly or suffer most in any war on crisis like this are the men, because they'll be the one that will be drafted to the field, they'll be the one that will be injured, but people will give preference to and prominence to women and children. And especially that's the Geneva Convention, which everybody has signed up to. But it's the price Sudan is paying for harming, a non-conventional army, because to every military, any military establishment, armed forces, or army or fighting troops signed up to what is called rules of engagement. There are some buildings you don't go to. You never touch any. You cannot. But because they're unskilled, untrained soldiers, they are just ragtag. They are just, I don't want to use the word terrorists. They are bandits that have been clad in military fatigues here and there. So that's what they're doing. Because any trained military personnel would know that it should not fire at anything that has to do with medical facility.
Okay, so finally, before I let you go, apparently before the current crisis in Sudan, one third of Sudan's population, nearly 16 million people actually, already needed humanitarian aid. In fact, some 3.7 million people were already internally displaced, mostly in Darfur. What do you think will happen to the rest of the citizens now that they have a full-blown war currently going on in the country?
I think this is going to be a blessing for Sudan if the head of the RRF can be neutralized at this point, because it created a lot of bad blood in Darfur. It became a warlord in Darfur. So if this crisis will consume him, I see a bright future for Sudan, because the new Sudan will rise. Sudanese are enterprising. Sudanese, if you go back in history of Sudan way back, they are always enterprising. Sudan has always been, a pride of Africa, and they will always rebuild. That's my conviction for Sudan. That's my conviction about Sudan. But at least for the first time in history, let us put an end to legitimizing or probably trying to correct the narrative or change the history about warlords, about criminals, bringing them into governance or into society. Let's say what it's for what it is. Let's call them for who they are, what they are. The leader of the RRF should be dealt with, because it was a criminal that was clad and given a seal of legitimacy by Omar al-Bashir, and that's what's causing this problem for Sudan.
All right, Demi, thank you so much for being part of the World News right here on Voice of the People TV. I do appreciate your input.
You're welcome.
Moving on, the Kremlin has said it shot down 2 drones launched by Ukraine and accused Kiev of attempting to kill Russian President Vladimir Putin. The alleged thwarted operation comes on the heels of a series of incidents, including train sabotages ahead of the popular World War II victory celebrations. Moscow and Putin was not wounded, and its forces downed the drone without any casualties. It said that debris from the drone fell on the territory of the Kremlin. Authorities have tried to reassure Russians that the conflict is distant and does not pose a threat to Russian territory. A recent series of apparent sabotage attacks have served as a reminder that Russia is exposed to enemy blows. They hit as Moscow is gearing up for May 9 celebrations, when Russia marks a Soviet victory over the Nazis in what has become a central event for Putin's rule. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the parade in Moscow was going ahead as expected, with no changes to the plans, and this is according to the news agencies there. Also on Wednesday, Moscow's Mayor Sergei Sobyanin announced a ban on unauthorized drone flights over the Russian capital. Now, Russia unleashed its worst attacks on Kiev in a year, according to Ukraine's military, as for the third time in 4 days, missiles and drones hit the city. The barrage came after Moscow accused Ukraine of attempting to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin in a drone strike at the Kremlin overnight on Wednesday, allegations Kiev has vehemently denied. Also, it stated that our city has not experienced such a heavy intensity of attacks since the beginning of this year. Last night, the aggressor launched another large-scale airstrike on the capital. Serhiy Popko, head of Kiev City Military Administration, wrote via Telegram, all Russian missiles and drones were destroyed in Kiev airspace by air defense forces. Popko disclosed after Moscow attacked the city with Shahed-type barrage munitions and missiles, presumably ballistic. There were no civilian casualties or damage to residential buildings and infrastructure. Iran has, however, given Russia hundreds of Shahed drones to use in its war in Ukraine, known as loitering munition. The drones are capable of circling for some time in an area before flying their explosive payload toward a chosen target. Sources say air raid sirens sounded for more than 3 hours in Kiev during the attack, and explosions were heard in the capital and the southern port city Odessa early Thursday morning. and this is according to Ukrainian parliament member Oleksiy Honcharenko. Now, a screen grab taken from video that has circulated on Russian social media purportedly shows the moment just before the detonation of a drone and smoke rising from the direction of the Kremlin. However, VOP television is yet to establish the veracity of those videos. The attack is alleged to have taken place in the early morning hours of Wednesday at an unspecified time. Meanwhile, Ukraine says the drones have struck the city of Odessa, had for Moscow and for the Kremlin written on them, suggesting the overnight strikes across Ukraine may have been relationed for the explosions in the Russian capital. Meanwhile, the toll from shelling in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson rose to 23 people. And of course, reportedly, the shellings of the city continued, while Alexander Protokhin, head of the Kherson Regional Ministry Administration, recently disclosed. The Russian military reportedly shelled the city of Kherson 16 times, including its residential area. Thursday's pre-dawn raid in Kiev comes after extraordinary allegations from Moscow that Ukraine launched an attempt to kill Putin with a drone strike on the Kremlin. Video that appeared in social media shows a bright flash and a puff of smoke over a part of Kremlin, the official residence of the Russian president and the most potent symbol of power in Moscow. The Kremlin said the attack was fought and the alleged drones destroyed. Now, in a recent statement, it regarded the alleged attack as terrorism and a deliberate attempt on Putin's life. Russia reserves the right to take retaliatory measures where it sees fit. The Russian president was not in the building at the time, according to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov. Ukraine denied involvement in the alleged strike. Meanwhile, former Russian official Ilya Ponomarev, who is linked with militant groups in the country, says that he believed the attack was a work of what he calls Russian partisans, not the Ukrainian military. U.S. officials said they were still assessing the incident and had no information about who might have been responsible. Also early on Thursday, fire broke out on 2 oil refineries in southwestern Russia following separate alleged drone strikes. At Russia's Ilsky oil refinery in the southwestern Krasnodar region, a fire ignited in the refinery's reservoir. Another drone struck a petrol product plant in Russia near the Ukrainian border during the night, according to Rostov Governor Vasily Golubev. The drone crashed into the construction site of an overpass at the Novoshakhtinsk plant near the village of Kiselevka, causing an explosion and fire which plant staff immediately extinguished. It isn't clear who is responsible for the drone attack. It comes after Russian state media on Wednesday said a drone strike ignited a fire that engulfed an oil storage facility in the port of Vona in Krasnodar. That facility is close to the Kerch Bridge that was set ablaze by Ukrainian forces in October 2022. It is, however, unclear how the fuel storage tank caught fire, and Ukraine has not commented on the incident. Now, Israeli troops in Turkey killed 3 Palestinians wanted in connection with a deadly attack against Israelis. The Israeli military recently disclosed the incident is the latest bloodshed in a relentless wave of violence. Forces entered the heart of the flashpoint city of Nablus in the early morning hours and raided an apartment where the men were located. Troops and the suspects exchanged fire, and the 3 men were killed. The military accuses the men of being behind an attack last month on a car near a Jewish West Bank settlement that killed a British Israeli mother and 2 of her daughters. It said 2 of the men, identified as Hassan Kadnani, Maed Mitzri, were members of the Hamas militant group. It described the 3rd man killed, Ibrahim Hura, as a senior operative who had assisted the other suspects. The Palestinian Health Ministry said 3 people were killed in the fighting but did not immediately identify them. The violence in Nablus comes at a particularly sensitive time in the region, days after a prominent Palestinian prisoner who was staging a lengthy hunger strike over his detention died in Israeli custody. His death set off a volley of rockets from the militants in Gaza and airstrikes in the coastal enclave that killed 1 man. The deadly attack last month on the Israeli car shocked Israelis because in an instant it reduced the D family from 7 members to 4. Hundreds of people packed the funerals, and the family's father, Leo, had been a recurring figure in Israeli media, saying he bears no hatred towards the killers of his family and calling for national unity amid a deep societal rift. Now, U.S. authorities say a New York subway passenger has died after an ex-Marine tackled him and put him in a chokehold. According to the city's medical examiner, 30-year-old Jordan Neely died from compression of the neck. Knew Neely as a Michael Jackson impersonator who was known to regularly dance on the trains. On Monday afternoon, he was yelling and pacing back and forth on a train in Manhattan. Witnesses and police recently disclosed when he was restrained by at least 3 people, including a U.S. Marine veteran who pulled one arm tightly around his neck. Video of the altercation posted online by a freelance journalist showed the man lying beneath Neely, holding him in a headlock position for several minutes as Neely tried and failed to break free. A second passenger pinned Neely's arm while a third person held down his shoulder. It wasn't clear why the group had moved to restrain him. Neely, who is black, lost consciousness during the struggle. Paramedics and police arrived after the train stopped at a station, but he was pronounced dead at a Manhattan hospital shortly afterwards. The 24-year-old Marine veteran, who appeared to be white, was taken into custody and released without charges. His name has not been released publicly. The medical examiner's office classified Neely's death as a homicide and the manner as a chokehold, but noted that any determination about criminal culpability would be left to the legal system. The final round of negotiations between Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers will be held on Thursday in Washington with the participation of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The talks will get underway at 10:45 p.m. Armenian time. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Miroyan, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov on Wednesday had a tripartite meeting in the U.S. Capitol. On April 30, Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan left for Washington on a working visit. A trilateral meeting between Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov was held on Monday in Washington. Before that, the U.S. Secretary of State had bilateral meetings with FM's Mirzoyan and Bayramov, and after the tripartite discussion, Mirzoyan and Bayramov had several more meetings. In 2021, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, announced his readiness to sign a peace treaty with Armenia. In March 2022, Baku conveyed to Yerevan its 5-point proposal on the normalization of bilateral relations. The Armenian side added adjustment to the proposal and sent its version to the Azerbaijani side. Since then, there have been several rounds of negotiations between the two parties at various levels. And that is a wrap on the world news right here on Voice of the People television. My name is Esther Nwachukwu. Do subscribe on our YouTube channel at Voice of the People TV, on our social media platforms at VOP TV Live. Do like and share. Stay tuned for more interesting programming.